Imagine picking up what looks like a cozy, inspirational faith-based novel.
Right, like you're expecting a heartwarming story about community or
Yeah,
forgiveness.
exactly. You settle in, you turn the page, and suddenly, bam, you are dropped right into the middle of a gritty, tactical sniper
Oh
operation.
yeah, a complete tonal shift,
And the characters aren't just fighting regular bad guys, right? They are fighting a literal demonic cartel.
which is wild.
It is. So today we are exploring a narrative world that takes like every single expectation of its genre, completely shreds it, and demands that its readers wake up to a brutal reality. Welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks. Yeah, we're really looking at a profound shift in storytelling today. We're moving away from fiction as a form of escapism and exploring what happens when an author designs their books to act as a psychological survival manual.
Yeah, our mission today is to explore this fascinating and honestly highly controversial subgenre of literature spearheaded by Rena Lynn's Prepare for the End series.
It's definitely a divisive series.
For sure. And we are going to unpack the psychological and emotional pushback this series intentionally triggers in its Christian audience by, well, absolutely refusing to bubble wrap the truth about the nature of evil.
And we've got a massive stack of materials to pull from for this.
Oh, tons. We have excerpts from multiple novels in the series, including A Safe Haven and Intriguing Truth. Plus, we're analyzing the author's own marketing directives and this really comprehensive analytical essay that breaks down the series' socio-theological impact.
The breadth of these sources really gives us a complete view of not just what happens in the story, but the underlying architecture,
Yeah.
like why it was written in a specific jarring way.
Right. Now, before we jump in, it is crucial to note that our sources today contain highly charged political, societal, and theological viewpoints, touching on deep state corruption, globalist agendas, and literal spiritual warfare.
Yeah, very heavy stuff.
Very heavy. And we are absolutely not taking sides or endorsing any of these viewpoints. Our goal is simply to impartially report on the fascinating ideas contained in the original source material, so you, the listener, can understand the architecture of this unique narrative world.
That context is so vital because understanding this series requires recognizing that Lynn's work is, well, it's engineered to be an ice water wake-up call to readers who might normally prefer to look away from those charged topics.
Okay, let's unpack this and start right there
Right.
with the friction this creates. Because to understand the world of these novels, we have to look at what the author is actively tearing down.
Right, the genre expectations.
Yeah. Traditional sanitized fiction usually functions like a gated community, right? You have this perimeter wall of genre tropes that keeps the real ugly world out.
Exactly. You know that whatever conflict arises, it will be neatly resolved.
Yep, and no one is going to get truly permanently damaged. But Lynn's marketing materials actually describe her own storylines as raw, gritty, and painful.
Which is quite the departure.
Right. I'm struggling to see the logic here. If you know your audience expects the safety of a gated community, why intentionally bulldoze the wall?
That's a great question.
Doesn't exposing your readers to things like brutal murder, high-level corruption, and satanic rituals risk completely alienating the exact audience you're trying to reach?
Well, the analytical essay in our stack addresses this exact paradox. The author doesn't view shocking the audience as a risk. She views it as a moral necessity.
Wait, really? A moral necessity?
Yeah, exactly. Lynn actively subverts the sanitized version of fiction because she believes it creates a dangerous complacency.
Oh, wow.
The essay argues that if readers only consume media where conflicts are mild and easily resolved, their psychological immune system basically weakens.
Huh.
They become fundamentally unequipped to process today's systemic aggressive realities.
So the pushback she gets from readers, that sense of being angry, jarred, or deeply uncomfortable, isn't a bug in the writing.
No, it's the intended feature.
It's the pain of a muscle being forced to work after atrophying.
That's a perfect way to put it. The narrative forces the reader to look at the unvarnished truth of human depravity without looking away. In fact, the series operates on a central mantra, spoken by the protagonist, Jake.
Right, I saw this in the excerpts.
He repeatedly states, "The truth isn't always pretty, but it's still the truth."
Wow.
Yeah. The sources show how characters start off in an idealistic state, enjoying a stable, comfortable world. But that idealism isn't just challenged, it is violently shattered. Lynn's narrative philosophy insists that retreating into comfort is no longer a viable survival strategy.
Okay, so if the complacency of cozy fiction is the disease, then what is the cure she prescribes? Because once you strip away the illusion of safety, you can't just leave the reader out in the cold with nothing.
Right, you have to give them a new framework.
Exactly. And in this series, that framework is a concept called kinetic Christian realism. Let's unpack the mechanics of this because it seems to be the engine driving the entire plot.
It really is. Kinetic Christian realism is the architectural foundation of the series. The analytical essay defines it as the strict, uncompromising integration of physical combat readiness and theological orthodoxy.
Meaning?
Meaning the characters are mandated to be watchmen. And in this context, being a watchman isn't a passive role where you simply observe and pray for things to get better.
It's not just sitting in a tower.
No, it is deeply tactical. The character Jake literally trains a group of men for kinetic battles, meaning tactical, physical, defensive engagements, while simultaneously training them for spiritual warfare.
It sounds like a dual key missile launch system, where
Yeah.
two people have to turn their keys at the exact same time to launch.
That's a great analogy.
In this narrative world, you need both keys, the tactical readiness and the spiritual grounding to survive. If you only have one, the system fails.
Exactly.
But how does the narrative actually reconcile the inherent friction there? Think about it from a theological standpoint. How do the characters balance the biblical commands to fear not and be of good cheer with a hyper-vigilant focus on tactical survival, weapons training, and an impending societal collapse? It's tough, right?
Yeah, doesn't the constant scanning for threats inherently require a baseline state of fear?
Well, the narrative actually utilizes that exact friction as the core engine for its drama. It doesn't present this balance as easy. It presents it as a grueling psychological burden.
Okay, that makes sense.
The sources detail a character named Tucker, who operates as a military sniper. The text spends a lot of time inside his head as he struggles immensely with the burden of what he sees through his scope.
Right, because he's seeing some horrific stuff.
Oh, awful. Specifically human trafficking and the absolute loss of innocence. Tucker constantly has to reconcile his deep faith with the kinetic violence required to stop those atrocities.
So the narrative separates vigilance from fear. It frames the physical preparedness as a divine calling to protect the innocent, rather than a frantic attempt to just save your own skin.
Yes. And she takes it a step further by establishing a very strict hierarchy between the two keys in your analogy.
How so?
The sources emphasize that kinetic action is utterly useless, and even dangerous, without spiritual alignment. Really?
Yeah. You can have all the tactical training, all the weapons, and all the physical strength in the world, but if you are fighting what the series portrays as literal demonic forces, your physical bullets will fail if you aren't spiritually grounded.
Wow.
The text forces the characters to constantly ask themselves, is there ever a right time to do the wrong thing?
Yeah.
They are navigating the razor-thin line between civility and survival, and they must do it without compromising their orthodoxy.
Here is where I want to push back a little on the world building, because to justify this extreme level of kinetic and spiritual readiness, the narrative has to present an equally extreme, unvarnished threat.
Sure.
What is the exact nature of the evil these watchmen are fighting? If we look at the villains outlined in the sources, they operate kind of like a malicious computer operating system.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
You have a bad person, the hardware, who is connected to a corrupt global network, but the entire system is being run by an ancient demonic entity, which is the software.
Right.
By making the ultimate enemy literal ancient spirits and demons, doesn't the author risk giving the human characters an out? Like, if a demon manipulated them, are the humans really accountable for these heinous crimes?
That's a huge question, and the analytical essay dives deeply into this depiction of darkness to clarify the mechanics of how evil operates in Lynn's world.
And what does it say?
The narrative is incredibly careful to maintain absolute human accountability.
Oh, okay.
The humans in the series aren't just innocent victims possessed against their will. They actively choose to serve the darkness to feed their own fleshly lusts.
Interesting.
The essay quotes a foundational piece of the narrative's theology saying, lust is the desire of demons acted out through humans.
Meaning the human desires are the vulnerability in the code.
Exactly.
The humans crack their own doors open through their pursuit of power, pleasure, or revenge. And that specific choice is what allows the demonic entities to enter and manipulate the system.
That symbiosis is exactly how the series tackles horrifying, real-world issues without minimizing human guilt. The narrative explicitly links systemic human trafficking and the abuse of children to satanic rituals and the occult.
Right.
It portrays corrupt, globalist systems not just as modern political failures, but as the current manifestations of an ancient, ongoing demonic war. The author takes the most brutal headlines of today and frames them as the latest battles in a 6,000-year-old spiritual conflict.
And there is a really fascinating connection made in the sources regarding the psychology of these villains. It ties modern psychological disorders to ancient heresies. Let's talk about the Nephilim and the Gnostic elements.
Oh, this part is wild.
It is. For anyone who isn't deep into biblical apocrypha, the Nephilim are essentially described in ancient texts as the offspring of fallen angels and humans. They represent the ultimate corruption of flesh and spirit. And Gnosticism was an early heresy where leaders claimed to have secret, exclusive knowledge, using it to manipulate and control their followers. So how does the author weave those ancient concepts into a modern thriller?
This is perhaps one of the most unique elements of Lynn's world building. The analytical essay references a supplemental poetry book she wrote called Shattered Dreams,
Okay.
which was specifically written for women going through a divorce with a narcissist. The essay connects this intense focus on narcissism directly to those ancient Gnostic false teachers, like the historical figure Simon Magus.
Well, really? So the text is arguing that modern narcissism isn't just a clinical personality disorder found in the DSM-5.
No, the narrative treats it as a profound spiritual condition.
Wow.
Within the theology of the series, narcissism is a direct reflection of Lucifer's original rebellion. Lucifer is portrayed as the ultimate narcissist, a being so consumed by his own reflection that he is structurally unable to perceive his own fallen state.
That is heavy.
It is. Therefore, when the characters in the novels face manipulators, deceitful workers, or spiritual abusers, often within their own churches or ranks, the series portrays this gaslighting and manipulation as a modern, direct manifestation of ancient demonic warfare.
That reframes the entire concept of the enemy. It paints a picture of a threat that is terrifyingly supernatural, but it's wearing the face of a charismatic leader, or a trusted friend, or the guy sitting next to you in the pew.
Exactly. The enemy isn't just a monster in the dark, it's the manipulation of trust.
Which leads to the core question, or why? Why force the reader to vividly visualize this level of systemic, inescapable darkness? Exposing the horrifying depth of this evil isn't just for shock value.
No, definitely not.
According to the essay, it serves a highly specific function. It creates the necessary contrast to highlight the absolute urgency of the spiritual war and the raw power of God's redemption.
And to understand how that redemption functions, we have to look at the concept of the safe haven in the books. The analytical essay draws a brilliant historical parallel between the characters in these novels and the ancient desert fathers of early Christianity.
Oh, for context, the Desert Fathers were those early monks in the 3rd century of their faith in isolation.
And the characters in the Prepare for the End novels, like Jake and Maggie, are doing the modern equivalent. They are building physical and spiritual outposts against a shattered, corrupt world.
Right.
But these havens aren't just bunkers where they hide and wait for the end. They function more like fire breaks in a forest fire.
I love that analogy. A fire break isn't just an empty space. It's an engineered line of defense where the fuel has been intentionally cleared out to stop the fire from spreading further. It is an active mechanism of resistance.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly how do these havens function in the story, though?
They are places where the characters can train tactically, protect the vulnerable, and maintain their orthodoxy away from a society that the narrative describes as having given itself over to paganism.
Okay.
And this is where the power of redemption comes in. The most striking mechanical example of this in the sources is the storyline of a character named Erwin.
Erwin. His arc is incredibly intense based on the excerpts. Break down what happens to him and how it demonstrates this kinetic spiritual warfare.
Well, Erwin's backstory is pure trauma. He has been groomed by a coven since childhood.
Jeez.
Yeah, the narrative brings him to a point where he is forced into a horrifying blood ritual designed to permanently bind demonic entities to his soul. It is the absolute apex of the darkness Lynn portrays.
Right.
But in the midst of this ritual, he remembers a fragment of truth his Christian grandmother taught him. He uses his last ounce of agency to call on the name of Jesus.
And the narrative response isn't just a quiet internal peace. It is explosive.
Very much so. The sources describe angelic warriors physically appearing in the room with swords of blue fire to fight off the demonic entities.
That is incredible.
It is a vivid, kinetic, almost cinematic representation of redemption. The author uses this scene to mechanically prove a point within the world building. No matter how deeply entrenched the systemic evil is, and no matter how broken the human hardware has become, salvation is instantaneous and powerful if the human choice is made to ask for it.
Think about how you would process that as a reader. You are dragged through the mud of human trafficking, occult rituals, and extreme psychological manipulation just to witness this explosive rescue.
Right.
But the sources also indicate that the rescue doesn't magically erase the trauma. The characters still have to live with the psychological scars. If the series is constantly forcing characters into impossible moral dilemmas and focusing on tactical readiness and impending boom, how does it avoid becoming just a bleak, depressing survival manual?
Well, the essay points out that the series elevates itself above a simple prepper manual by anchoring the tactical survival in profound emotional realism.
How so?
The psychological toll is mathematically accounted for in the narrative. For instance, the sources note the inclusion of original songs of lament written by the characters themselves.
Yeah, the lyrics provided in the stack are haunting. There's a line that goes, "Who will I serve? Who will I be? There's so many things pulling at me."
Very heavy.
It's not a triumphant victory song. It is the sound of someone actively drowning in moral ambiguity. Why include poetry and lament in a tactical thriller?
Because unexpressed trauma destroys a tactical team from the inside out. Lament acts as the psychological pressure valve.
Ah, I see.
The series dives deep into the mechanics of brokenness. We see a character named Maggie struggling for a long time to recover lost memories of extreme trauma. The narrative doesn't offer a miraculous overnight healing for her mind.
It doesn't bubble wrap her recovery.
Exactly. It forces the reader to sit with her in the painful, drawn-out process of recovery.
So the fiction itself acts as a simulator. By reading about Maggie processing her trauma, or Tucker wrestling with the moral weight of pulling the trigger, the reader is being run through a psychological obstacle course.
Precisely. The narrative constantly poses a silent question to the audience. What would you do if this was your reality?
Wow.
It forces the reader to define their own moral, physical, and spiritual boundaries within the safety of their imagination, long before a real-world crisis hits. It is actively testing and building their psychological resilience.
We've covered a massive amount of intense ground today. We've seen how Rena Lynn's Prepare for the End series takes a wrecking ball to the gated community of safe, cozy Christian fiction.
It really does.
We looked at how she replaces that complacency with kinetic Christian realism, demanding that tactical physical readiness be perfectly paired with orthodox spiritual warfare.
Right.
We explored how she forces her readers to confront the most brutal realities of humanity, drawing direct lines from modern horrors like trafficking and narcissism back to ancient demonic entities and Gnostic heresies.
Yeah, that connection was fascinating.
And ultimately, we unpacked how all of this gritty realism isn't there to just scare people. It is meticulously designed to wake the reader up, showcase the explosive power of redemption, and simulate the psychological endurance needed for an eschatological or end times battle.
You know, when you look at the total architecture of the series, it leaves us with a truly fascinating dynamic to consider regarding the future of literature.
Oh.
The sources explicitly describe this kind of fiction as a training ground for reality.
Right.
If literature is increasingly shifting away from providing an escape and instead is being engineered as a literal psychological and tactical simulation to prepare people for societal collapse, how does that fundamentally alter the psychological contract between an author and their reader?
That's a great point.
If you open a book and it actively demands that you prepare for war, does the book cease to be a piece of entertainment and instead become a vital survival tool for the mind?
That is a phenomenal question to chew on. Next time you pick up a novel, ask yourself, are you looking for a temporary escape from reality, or are you looking for an ice water wake-up call to prepare you for it? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of a truly unique narrative world. Keep reading, keep questioning the narratives you consume, and we will catch you next time.